Okay, today's video I want to do a little bit of a 4-bar tuning guide. I think about things a little bit different, so this is not going to be your normal tuning guide I think that you'd find on the internet someplace. It's a little different. So let's roll the intro video and let's talk about some 4-bar tuning. I've spent the last 30 plus years working on race cars, building race cars, and racing cars. And I'm here to help you better understand racing technology. Okay, 4-bar tuning. You can go on the internet and you get a lot of different tuning guides and some nice diagrams. Do this, do that, loosen, tighten. But I almost want to get to the kind of core on not only loosen and tighten, but what it actually does to loosen and tighten. I think a lot of these tuning guides really miss out on things like this. So I think I'm gonna first run through the list and then we'll go over and make some diagrams and I'll show you kind of what's happening on those corners. I made some cheat notes, but I think the first place we're going to start is going to be the left rear lower corner. I think that is probably one of the most sensitive bar changes you can make. Small changes there will really affect your car. So let's start off with that left rear bar angle. It runs so far uphill that when you start dropping that thing, it really swings things around. There's two things it really does. One, it will add indexing, dynamic indexing to the left rear spring as you start dropping it. The second thing it does is it turns the rear end, gives you more steer, and puts that right side tire alignment outside, the right rear tire alignment outside the right front, and gives you steer and gives you, I guess, a loose condition if you want to use that term. But basically, it steers the rear axle a little more the more angle you put in that thing, and then that right rear tire will steer a little bit more and it actually pokes outside the right front, and that's a big deal. I always talk about that right side steer and how that tire alignment on the right side is so critical. Well, a bar angle change on the left rear will put that right rear tire outside the right front more and add more steer. But it also adds indexing. As you drop or as you raise that left rear lower bar angle, it will actually add or decrease indexing on the left rear bird cage, which actually is a wedge adjustment. As you drop that left rear lower rod angle, it'll actually dynamically help index that spring more and add more wedge, which is, we know more wedge is traction on the gas, and more wedge is less side bite, basically. So as the track dries out and you're looking, if you are looking for either more traction on the gas or a little bit less steer, that left rear bar angle is going to be pretty critical. I don't think a lot of guys play with that much anymore, but that is a place to start to look if you want to make a chassis adjustment there and you're at a different track where it's kind of unfamiliar, you're struggling a little bit. That's kind of where you want to go. Lowering that bar will add a wedge and drive. Raising that bar will add steer and loose condition. The next bar we're going to work on is the right rear lower. And since this one doesn't have much angle to it, I don't believe it adds much adjustment to the right side tire alignment. It's actually, I call it a pivot bar. And your left rear bar angle will steer your car, and your right rear bar angle kind of keep it the same and allow that left rear to steer. What the right rear lower does do is add or subtract indexing to the right rear. And since the right rear spring is usually quite a bit stiffer than the left rear, the right rear indexing will be more pronounced. If you lower that right rear bar, it'll add right rear spring indexing and make the car tighter, give it more side bite. If you raise the right rear bar, it will actually take indexing out and take traction out of the right rear corner. I guess it would be lowering it would take, wedge out if you want to use the proper term. Raising it will actually add wedge in because you're taking right rear out, the wedge will increase. But that right rear bar angle is probably very, very critical. The more indexing you need on that right rear. When I hung out a couple times with Darren Miller and stuff like that, he got his Rocket chassis. He got them custom made at Rocket. Actually, he requested certain changes, and when he got his new Rocket, they had his changes just for him. But then he took at it, and I was looking at one of his cars, and he actually took a drill and actually drilled between the holes because he kind of thought that some of those changes on the right rear were so critical and so powerful that he didn't want to move always to a full hole. He'd move, well, basically a half hole in between. Maybe it was 0, 1.5, and 3 for a degree angle. But that right rear lower really works with the right rear spring, wedging, and traction. Next, we'll move to the right rear upper bar. I'm not really sold on this yet. I haven't fully figured this one out. I call it a support bar. If you raise that bar, what it does is it'll put your instant center further underneath the axle center line and hold the car up on that right rear corner. If a big cushion is developing and you're going to be running that cushion all the way around the top, my gig was always years ago to raise that top bar up to give you support, because there's nothing worse than when you run in on that cushion, that car falls over there, gets right rear tight, and you shove the nose. So I always use that bar as kind of like a support bar. If it was slick from top to bottom and you might want to, run through the middle or something, I was very leery of raising that bar or even lowering it a little bit, because then you can get more into the spring. The lower that bar is, the less support it would have, but then it would index into that spring a little bit more, and you get a little bit more spring compliance over there. And spring compliance and shock compliance, that's what gives you traction and compliance over bumps on the right rear. Once you make that right rear too stiff, unless you got aero backing you up, that the spring compliance and the shock compliance don't work as well, and it'll actually could help you buzz the tires or take traction out. So I use that right rear as a support bar. If I could ever get into a position where I could lower that bar and get a little bit more traction, that's what we did. Just be careful on running those rough tracks where you're going to bang a cushion, get in there. If you get that right rear top too soft, all it's going to do is fall over there, and then it's just going to cause a world of problems. The last bar we're going to run into on the rear end here is the left rear upper. This is another kind of a weird bar. There was a time there, before we got really sophisticated, I'd lower that bar down and get it to a point where it was almost starting to cam over, because I felt that with the indexing you'd get when that thing got close to the top, it would index hard into that spring, give you wedge. It also worked with that left rear spring and help hold the car up. That was a big deal if you ever want to get traction on your front end. You could either lock down your right front spring, or you could use your left rear stuff to kind of hold that left rear corner up and hold the right front down. You got to work it and you got to play with it to see exactly how much bar angle. For years I heard people talk about, well, this is the maximum bar angle for traction on the left rear, and I never bought into that, because if I had a driver that I was helping that really wanted that big swing and that index push into that left rear, you could go over 45 degrees. And once that bar starts getting over 45 degrees, it would really crank that bird cage and add a ton of wedge. So that's kind of an indexing wedge, hold up your car type of bar. But now we're working so much with droop limit and restrictions there and chains and everything else. I don't know how much that bar, tuning that bar, will actually make a big a difference. It's almost like I feel that left rear top bar now is almost like a set it and forget it. You work with that bar, your spring rate, and your chain for the droop, and then you tune other places around the car to get the car balance and everything where you need it to be. Once I set a car up now, or to help a guy set a car, once we get that left rear and all that stuff to start jiving, we really don't play with that location a whole lot anymore. So let's go to the drawing board. I'll draw a couple diagrams on the whole 4-bar tuning thing. Okay, this is kind of a rough representation of our left and our right rear 4-bar area here. Left rear bar angle. As you swing this down, it will make it easier for this bird cage to index into that spring, and it'll index faster, shoving that spring up and adding wedge to this corner. We call it dynamic wedge. When you bring this left rear bar angle up, it'll actually take dynamic wedging out of it, but it will help that left rear steer more, which will make a freer condition and a better steering condition. Left rear bar angle, like I said, that's kind of set it and forget it. You work with the other things you have here. The further it gets up towards neutral, the faster the speed increases. I do a video about speed in your car, and basically the flatter this thing runs, because it's on an arc, the slower. The further it gets up in angle, it speeds up, which will add more indexing the further vertical this bar is. So getting all those things to jive on a left rear is pretty important, and it takes some time sometimes. Right rear is a little bit different. Normally in our right rear stuff, the right rear bar angle is pretty flat. Left rear bar, or right rear bar angle, then will be up a little bit. I think usually we had about a 17 and a half inch split here, if I remember right. We always try to maintain that a little bit. If you raise one, you might want to raise the other. If you lower one, you might want to lower the other. We always try to keep that around, I think it was around a 17 and a half inch split. But what happens here As your right rear compresses as your car rolls over, it will actually rotate this bird cage in and add right rear spring to it, or take wedge out basically, because your wedge is your left rear and your right front. So by lowering this right rear rod angle, usually about 3 degrees low is the max you'll ever get. I don't know even if guys are using this too much anymore. I know some guys are, but I don't know what the mass thinking is on this anymore. The lower you get this right rear bar angle, the more indexing and the more wedge you take out, because you're adding right rear spring to it. This top bar angle, like I said, it's kind of a support bar. If you take the intersection of these 2 points, if that intersection is above the birdcage center line, what it'll actually do is it'll add push point. It'll actually start pushing down slightly on the right side corner. If these two bars, the intersection point is below the center line of the birdcage or axle, it'll actually add lift to that right rear. So that's another thing to kind of consider and keep in mind, whether you're getting your shove, your push point above or below that axle center line will make a big difference. Like I said, if you're running the cushion, you know there's going to be a monster cushion up there and you don't want that car to fall, make sure you keep your bars up, or at least that right rear top up a little bit, so you don't get that collapse. Once this point gets below there, then it's actually working with your car up above, and if you hit that cushion, it'll all just collapse and then you'll lose the front end. It just gets nasty. So make sure this is kind of a tuning device on how hard and how you're going to hit that right rear corner. If you like this video, so you can subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for notifications. Whenever I get a new video out and you sign into YouTube, it will notify you that I got a new video. It's not like notifications where it's going to spam your email or anything like that. It just, when you get into YouTube hunting for new videos, it'll just alert you that I upload a new video. So I guess we'll see you in the next video.